Oh, we are live. All right.
Hi.
Hey, everyone. So, it's me, Jay, from Alissa and Jay, and we are very happy to announce that this will be the last live stream of the end of the year. So, we wish you very happy New Year and belated Merry
Merry
Christmas.
belated Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yeah, so Alyssa will be right beside me, helping out to read out the chats and help me understand the questions that you might have, right?
Yep, then I'll go off screen now and monitor from somewhere else. Right. See
All
ya.
right.
Thanks
Poof.
for joining.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Once again, welcome back to the channel, and I hope the audio is okay, right? Please, if anybody is in the stream, please let me know if the. All right. So, before we start the session, I want to once again let you know that we have this website called Alissa and Jay, and here we talk about a lot of things, but mainly travel and tech. Tech related to what are the gears that help you create some travel content. All right, and I am very passionate about photography, so I decided to have my photography posts regarding like how it can help you achieve better photographers. I mean, how achieve become a better photographer. So let me show you my work here. You can visit alissaj.com, ALISSA dot JAY.com. No dot between Alissa and Jay. It's alissaj.com. Right from here, you can go to photos. I mainly shoot nature and wildlife, and wildlife is something that is very close to my heart. So that's what I do. And here I have so many wildlife photos that you might enjoy. If you want to see more of my content, you can visit my Instagram. It's Jaya Karthi Nat. You can check it out in any of the links below. Here we have all the links to get in touch with us. We have Instagram, our YouTube channel, and our Instagram for tech, especially, and we have our Facebook page as well. And in our YouTube channel, we have several camera-related content and travel vlog-related content. You can check them out in the playlist. Here we have so many of them. I'm not only Sony user. I am a user of all cameras. I have tested several camera systems in the past, and I have come to a conclusion that Sony A6700 is the best compromise of all the cameras today. So I will be using that to explain and demonstrate today's topic, that is how to get sharp images, right? Before we move on, let me give you a bit more idea about how to navigate in the website. So we have alissaj.com. From there, you can click on the tech page to go into the tech page, and you can click on the travel page to see our travel post. Right now, it's still under construction, but we do have one example over here. It's Brunei travel vlog. Alissa went there alone with her mom. And so she has her own experience posted here. Here you can find a lot of information about the trip duration, the type of trip, attractions, etc. So here it's like pretty detailed actually. You can visit this page for your travel information. And in our tech channel or tech web page, here we have a lot of things that we discuss, but right now I have just posted a few related to Sony and Rode. I am a very big advocate for really good audio quality for your content. And so I have a lot of tested microphones posted here as well, my reviews. And sometimes I even make content how to photograph few things. Like, for example, I have a post where I talk about how you can photograph lightnings. So you can check that video as well. It's not a long video, it's a very short video. All right. Why I have decided to have this session as a live stream is because I can connect with you. It's I want it to be an interactive session, and the more questions you have, it's good for me to answer you right away instead of sending in the chat. And also, this post called Art of Photography is something where I'm updating all the photography related information. So this is all this is a one single page where you can know everything about photography, and it is still under development. As you can see here, I have a few basic information about photography, like what it means to be a photographer, what you need to achieve being a photographer, what motivates you to be a photographer. And here we have more like elements of photography, exposure triangle, etc., colors, compensation, focus, and you get to play with these sliders. You can actually close this, you can play with how before and after any effect is applied, how it looks like. And also I give you some examples on what kind of image can be achieved using some principles of photography. With that said, let's move on to today's topic. Well, before that, I want to show you I have a lot of interactive way of explaining things to you. So you can click on these numbers over here to see the examples over here. So I might use these images as an example to convey certain messages, right? For example, in today's topic of how to get sharp images, shutter speed and ISO are two important factors. And if you're wondering, how does ISO affect the images to get sharp images, I will explain in a bit. All right, so let me go here to this part, Chapter 4, Sharp Photos. Chapter 4 is where I discuss all the types, photography types and techniques, and I think that's where our topic lies today. All right, before that, I want to know any questions, any chat, all right? Okay, here, let's say this is like a very Christmassy time, New Year time. You tend to spend time with your families and friends or colleagues, and you tend to have a camera. Let me switch to a different view so that you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so let's say you have a camera like this, for example, A6700, and you take it to your favorite event, spend time with your family gathering, or you want to spend time somewhere taking photos. But after you take these images back to your computer, you feel like the images are so soft. What did I miss? How can I improve my photography? These are the kind of questions you have. Or sometimes when the events are happening too fast, you're stuck just staring at the camera, fiddling upon the settings. Why are my images so shaky? And you don't want to be in the situations. In those situations, these things that we discussed today will help you achieve better quality images. Right, so I will explain everything you need to know from this camera, that is A6700, and I have the top view so that I can show you the menus that we are going to check out. And also I have a few other things that I want to show you. So for example, here I have a few other cameras, like for example this one, Fujifilm X100 as well. Why this is important, I will talk when it comes to the topic of autofocus. I will explain why how these two cameras compare and which one can achieve better photos, even though this one has better resolution than this one. All right, so those are the kind of things we'll be discussing in this video, in this session of live stream. Okay, let me switch it back. All right. So what are the points to consider when it comes to getting sharp images? One, the lens. You need to have a very reasonably sharp lens, and you need to have a wide lens so that you get your ISO number right. We'll discuss that later. You need to have a spot-on focus, like the subject you're shooting should be in focus, otherwise the image will not look sharp. When I talk about sharpness, what do I mean? Okay, let me give you an example what I mean by sharpness. So here are a few images shot in the studio environment. Look at this image for a moment, and you can see here, it's very clear that you can see the contact lens on the eyes. It's so clear and evident. And this is the kind of sharpness you can achieve with a good quality camera and lens combination with proper techniques and nailing the autofocus on the eye, etc., etc., etc. This is a very good example of an image that is sharp. And I can give you some examples where the image is actually kind of soft. So for example, if you take this one, here you can still see the contact lens being on the eye, but it's not focused right on the eye, right? So I could say technically this is softer on the eye than the other images. Even though the focus nailed on some of these parts of the face, the overall image looks a bit soft, right? So why this affects any photographer or any image is because you tend to lack the ability to have the total control on the image in the post. So for example, you can always dumb down the sharp images, but you cannot increase the sharpness after taking the shot, because it will be so not realistic. It will not be natural. But overall, I like this image because the lights are great, the colors are great, but the sharpness is not quite there compared to the other photo. So this one, you can see it's right on the eye, and you can see the tiny, tiny gradient of the contact lens on her eye. So yeah, you can see tiny strands, very clear, right? So this is what you can achieve with good quality camera and lens. We will discuss further. This is what I mean by sharpness. To achieve this, every single time you click the camera, these are the points you can consider. So shutter speed is something very important. Camera movement, stabilization, light and ISO, and finally sensor. I think I have put this list up in the order of priority. So the first priority is the lens. If the lens is soft, everything will be soft. So let me start with the lens. Okay, so when you consider a lens, there are a few things you can consider. The lens should be sharp, and even if the lens is sharp, it is not sharp throughout the range of the aperture. You need to find the optimal aperture range to have the sharp sweet spot. Okay, let me explain that in a bit. And we need to avoid the lens imperfections. Like, let's say when the backlight is very high and your subject is very dark, the lens tend to perform something called ghosting, where the entire image looks washed out, as in like very less contrast, everything looks dull, as if your image is hazy. All right, so that's something you should avoid, and avoid maximum or minimum apertures, maximum and minimum apertures. All right, so let me explain here using this as an example. So let me switch the view. All right, so these are two lenses, and I'm not going to use this camera. Sorry, these are two cameras, and I'm not going to use this camera, Fujifilm, for the time being. We will use it on the topic of autofocus. For now, I want to show you the comparison between these two lenses. So here we have this lens, the 35mm f1.8, and here we have the 15mm f1.4 lens. These two are made very different. One is a G lens and the other one is a regular lens, but both are weather sealed, and 35mm lens has a bit more optical flaws compared to the 15mm. 15mm is very, very sharp, right from corners to corners, even at f1.4, the brightest of the aperture. And this lens can go to the aperture of f16. But if you want to know where is the sharpness sweet spot, it lies at f5.6 for the camera A6700. So for example, if I were to talk about this lens, where is the sweet spot, it depends on which camera this is mounted on, for if it is a APS-C size camera or a full frame camera. So 35mm actually performs better, the 35mm, this lens, performs better at f5.6 on a full frame lens, on a full frame camera, and it performs at f4 on this APS-C camera. So that's the difference. So you have to make sure that on that particular camera, which is the sweet spot for the aperture. All right, so let me demonstrate how it looks like. So here, when I talk about the optical flaws for any camera, you can already see something. Yeah. All right, so here, this is how the image looks. Zoom in a bit. I have my trusty little teddy bear over here, over there, that's actually pink color. But for today's video, I have decided to go with yellow throughout the session. So here for this pink teddy bear, you can see that it's right, the autofocus point is right on the eye. But you can see there's a little bit of ghosting on the edges because it's backlit, and it will be predominant. It will be very, very apparent if the light is directly above the subject or behind the subject. You can see here. So this is what you want to avoid. And to get really good images, you might need to use external light on the subject, which we will discuss in the future section. So let's say, for example, if I'm going to increase the aperture, you can see that the scene is getting dark. But for a moving subject, you might want to have higher shutter speed. I will talk about the higher shutter speed in the future section as well. So I'm going to increase the shutter speed. I'm lowering the shutter speed actually, and I'm increasing the aperture of the image. Yes, of course, you're not going to get that shallow depth of field, but you will end up getting a sharp image. So there's a compromise you need to do in this particular case. All right, there are other factors as well, but even though the lens can go up to 1.8, I want to stick at f2.8 so that I get relatively sharper images. All right, I still maintain the ISO at ISO 100. All right, so this is what I'm going to go with if I don't have any light. All right, so just so I can explain the sharpness of the image. So lens selection is important. How you are shooting with that lens is important. Understanding the lens you have and its sweet spot of aperture is also important. So this way, understanding the lens, buying the right lens will actually get you right sharp images. Okay. Why I decided to buy this 15mm lens is I get edge-to-edge sharpness, which I can never achieve with this 35mm f1.8 lens. There is no edge-to-edge sharpness whatsoever, but this 15mm lens can. All right, so that's one way of getting sharp images. Number two is the focus. If you don't nail the focus, you don't get proper sharp images. So here I have the focus. Nailing the focus is important, and actually the light kind of affects for autofocus performance of any camera. If you are okay with manual focus, you can always do manual focus and nail the focus right on the eye or right on wherever on the subject. So I will give you a few examples as well here. In this case, so I want to talk a bit about manual focus and manual focus assist. So let me show this. Yeah. And our subject is not going to change for the time being. Here I'm going to set the autofocus to manual focus. Right, so once I set it to manual focus, now I have something called focus assist turned on, which helps me to navigate to the subject's eye and make sure that it's actually in focus. So you can see here the teddy bear's eye is kind of in focus. Now it's completely in focus, right? This is the way I make sure if I'm going to use the manual focus that the subject is in focus and you can take a shot. So this, I know for sure the subject is going to be in focus. Now, how about the autofocus? So I'm going to simulate a few things. I'm going to turn off the light and see if my camera can detect the subject, right? So earlier you saw that, okay, it is detecting the subject. You see, it's obviously detecting the bear's eye. But what if I turn off the light? Sometimes you're in indoors condition, sometimes you're heavily in a backlit condition. So this light is completely off. I'm readjusting the focus. So does it detect the autofocus? Sorry, does the autofocus detect the eye of the bear? I'm not sure. You can see it is detecting the face, but not the eye as before. But having a little bit of light actually helps the camera to detect the eye. So having the light helps the camera to detect the eye. And having more light is actually very beneficial. For example, if you have a light in the front of the subject, it's much more convenient for the autofocus to pick it up. So I'm coming back. It automatically picks it up right after I come back. But let's see now. It takes some time. Still not yet picked up. I have to half press the shutter button for the camera to pick up the eye. So this is what I mean. If the light is on the face, it's gonna pick up instantaneously. So this is how the autofocus works, right? And make sure you have enough light on the subject to nail the autofocus right where you want. And autofocus in this camera is amazing. So A6700 is a camera that has fantastic autofocus performance. But what if you're using a camera like the Fujifilm X106? What then? How does the autofocus perform? Right, you will see in a bit. Most cameras, okay, not most, like 50% of the cameras behave this way. So let me zoom in a bit. All right, so this is Fujifilm X100V, and you can see X106. I can see I am zooming in a bit. So you can see if I'm gonna focus, it's focusing. All right, it's not like completely in focus. It's not even trying to detect its eye. But this camera, trust me, this camera has the position and the capability to detect the eye, but it still is not detecting the eye. So this is what will happen if you're like using a camera that is actually kind of inferior in autofocus. And it's very hit and miss when you use such kind of cameras. So what if I zoom in a bit so that you can see how it performs? So I have zoomed in very closely, and still it is detecting the subject but not the eye. And this is what happens in majority of the cameras that doesn't have a very good autofocusing technology like the Sony a6700. This is actually more expensive than Sony a6700, but the focusing is not that great, okay? Even though the light is right on the subject. So if you're using some camera like this, that's, yeah, you need a lot of light on the subject, right? So that's how the autofocus matter for getting sharp images. Once the subject's eye is in focus, then you will tend to have better, sharper images. Now, first thing, as I mentioned, is the decent autofocusing camera. Now, the next point is autofocus modes. We will discuss the autofocus modes right away. You must have seen me selecting AFS versus AFC in my A6700. And let me show it again. So you need to have, if let's say, since we are talking about the moving subjects, you need to have autofocus continuous. So you need to have a proper autofocus mode. Let's say we go to autofocus modes. Here we choose autofocus continuous instead of autofocus single, so that you get to continuously focus on the subject and not just once. All right, so autofocus continuous, and there is something called autofocus area. So I have set to the zone autofocus area. What it means is like there's a zone where you can manipulate on the screen which zone to choose. Which zone to choose. So you can just choose which zone and you can select it. If I say, okay, I'm gonna compose the using the rule of thirds, I'm going to do it like lower 1/3 of the frame. So I'm gonna set it like this. So yeah, see, it's very convenient zone. But there are a few other modes as well. Let's say the subject is very, very tiny on the frame. Then you can use something called a spot medium. There are a few other modes. Spot large. So what it looks like is like this is how it looks. Spot large. And you can choose the other one. Spot medium will have a smaller square, and spot small will have much smaller square. So just in case, right? If you see, the spot size depends on how small the subject looks in the frame of this camera, okay, on the screen. And you have flexible spot, expand spot, several other autofocus area as well. Now, selecting this will actually help you to achieve a really good autofocus acquisition rate. So once the autofocus is achieved, so you can half press by locking it, and when you move around, it still autofocuses right on the eye. So this is how the selection of autofocus mode and the autofocus area helps. Now the third point is sensitivity. I have set the sensitivity for photos pretty high so that it acquires the subject instantaneously. I don't want the transition. But for video, it's a different story. I would want to have the transition speed set to low so that it's more sticky on the subject. That's for a different day, different topic, but this is for moving subject photography. So I'm talking about how to do it in particular. All right, so, and again, frame rates. Why do I put frame rates under focus? I don't know, but yeah, remember, frame rates is also important. Always try to have a low or high medium frame rate so that you get more number of frames. So what happens in every camera is that the autofocus tries to recalculate every other frame. So even if you miss the autofocus on the subject on the first frame, the second frame you tend to get the focus. So always have drive mode to set to like multiple shots and then shoot multiple shots and then filter it out later. Okay, even with a camera like A6700, I tend to go low. Okay, I tend to go low so that I get multiple frames so that I can filter the non-focused frames later, right? And that's pretty much about autofocusing. Okay, so before we move on to the shutter speed topic, any doubts? Any chat people asking doubts? Yeah, no? Okay, fine. I have these sessions to be interactive, and I would appreciate if some people who are joining to say hi or at least ask some doubts. But anyway, I will have more such sessions from January 2nd week onwards. And so during those weekly sessions, if you were to look at this live stream and have any questions, you can come and ask me during those sessions. Also, I highly suggest you to check out the first live stream that happened, for which the link, let me show you that. The link is right on this page, actually. The second section is actually the live stream, and you can click on this live stream to watch the first session where I explain everything related to the basics of photography. The next session, I probably will be discussing how to choose the right camera because, you know, after payday, you must be like itching to buy a new camera. Why not? Right? Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah, shutter speed. Let's move on to the shutter speed topic. Yeah, I do provide you with the table of all the shutter speeds for different situations. So yeah, please like and subscribe to my channel for more such content. And also consider buying me a coffee if you like the kind of content that I make. The link for buying me a coffee is right down in the footer section of this webpage. See, buy photos. You can also buy photos. Anyway, let's get back. And it's easy for me to navigate in this webpage because I have the table of contents right here. All right, so shutter speed, let's talk about it. It's, how to say, to freeze any frame, shutter speed is important. Okay, if the shutter speed is low, you get motion blur. You shoot one image today and you're like, oh, why is it very shaky? If I were to, okay, let me demonstrate. It's very, very convenient for me to demonstrate. All right, so this is manual mode. I shoot everything manual. It's my style. But if you were to use the auto mode, these big professional cameras, okay, semi-professional cameras do come with something called auto mode. And they do have like two modes here. One is auto intelligent and one is the regular auto. So let's say I choose the auto intelligent mode. Look at what happens here. The shutter speed is set to 1/60th of a second. The aperture is set to f4 and the ISO is auto. If I semi-press this, you can see the ISO value, 1600. It's pretty high in my opinion for this size sensor camera. But one more thing that changed is actually the aperture f2.8. Sometimes I might want to do f1.8, which you don't get the option to. But the background is relatively blurred. F2.8 is actually relatively sharper than f1.8, and I'm pretty sure that I can get a reasonably sharp image with this. Okay, but if it is too dark, let's see what happens then. Okay, so it is relatively sharp. As you can see here, the strands of this dust, I keep the dust here right on its face because that's what makes it look sharper. That's something that you can assess the sharpness when you compare different photos. So you can see it's pretty sharp. Now I want to turn off the light. Let's compare how it looks like when I turn off the light. It's so dark in here. You can see instantaneously the aperture raised its value. The shutter speed actually raised to ISO became 2000. The shutter speed is still at 160th of a second. This is not the case for most cameras. So if I have to explain further, I have to dig into the future topics, which I don't want to do yet, but you can still get relatively decent photos with this kind of shutter speed, 1/160th of a second. But let's say I am switching the camera to a different camera. I'm bringing in my totally not trustable camera. Okay, so this camera, you cannot trust it to work properly. And that's why I want to use it to demonstrate. So as you can see here, I can bring every single value to auto mode. Okay, auto ISO. I'm going to change to auto shutter speed. And the aperture is also in auto. Okay, let me put it in auto. Yeah, everything is in auto. So previously for A6700, we saw that the shutter speed was 1/160th of a second. But look at this. The shutter speed of this camera changed to 1/50th of a second instead of 1/160th of a second. So you can see what the camera gives the preference. So if I were to shake this and take a picture, A6700 is more likely to get sharper image than this camera, Fujifilm X106. All right, so let's look at the image. You can see the image is blurred. So if you have shaky hands or if the subject is moving, you're more likely to get sharper images with higher shutter speed than lower shutter speeds like 1/50th of a second. So you cannot trust the camera to do all the calculations for you. You need to rely upon proper values for the scene, situation, and the subject, and the light. All right, so this is a very clear example of ghosting. I can actually show you. Okay, this is ISO. As you can see, once I change the ISO, it's like it's still pretty bad. So I'm going to change to this one. Okay. Yeah, it's still pretty bad. A lot of ghosting here, if you can see. Yeah, this is what I mean by lens imperfection. So this is because the lens cannot handle the amount of light. I'm going to change it to f4. And now you should be able to see a proper image. See, now at f4, most lenses do pretty well. Okay, now this is not the point. Shutter speed is the topic today. All right, so there are different scenes. You don't get to use the same kind of shutter speed for every single scene. Depending on the scene, you tend to change the shutter speed. So let me pull this chart up. What I mean by different situation, what is a general rule? Right, general rule and a practical rule. There are two things that I want you to remember. So general rule is nothing but what is the rule of thumb as prescribed by many photography article. That is f. So what should be the shutter speed depending on what is the focal length of the lens is 1 divided by twice the focal length. So for example, let me change this one. Okay, so this is 35 millimeter lens, right? So here, this is the 35 millimeter lens. So the minimum shutter speed I want to have to get sharp images by the general rule is actually 1 by 70th of a second. Okay, 1/70th of a second. That should be the minimum shutter speed to get sharp images if you're going to hand hold the camera. But as a practical rule, I find that if the subject is not moving, then you are good enough to go with 1/35th of a second. So that should be enough, more than enough. So in this situation, if I'm going to do even 1/35th of a second, you should be good enough. That's the practical rule. But the general rule is to get sharp images, you need to use one twice of focal length, so 1/70th. So if I'm going to use 1/70th of the second, then I should be able to get really sharp images with even the moving subjects, right? And moving on, so for stars and Milky Way, I use at least 15 seconds, 8 seconds, depending on the lens that I use. If I'm going to use very wide lenses, I tend to use lower shutter speeds. If I'm using very like aperture of f2.8, I will be using a much longer shutter speeds and go with the star trail instead of getting the stars as dots. All right. So depending on how you want star trails or dots, you go with the kind of shutter speed. Silky, smooth water. So there are two types of water photography you can take. So let me explain this in this way. Right, so I have a few examples here. So this is the list of photos I have, and in nature, you can find all sort of photos when it comes to shutter speed. So this is the kind of photo I talk about. This is the silky smooth water flow kind of picture. You can click on this website. You can still interact with these images when I'm still talking to you during this live session. You can just open a new tab and go into these, right? So here, this is the kind of silky smooth water I talk about. And there is other kind of photo here. This is not quite silky smooth, but yeah, you can see in this area where the waves are like pretty aggressive, you can see that it's actually decently silky smooth. And if I go on this one, yeah, this is where it's not silky smooth, it's actually flowy. So depending on what type of shutter speed you use, you tend to get these kind of images, right? I will explain further, actually. So here, silky smooth, 8 seconds. Misty sky. What's misty sky, you ask? So let me explain here. So this is what I mean by misty sky. You see the sky is so, it's so not cloudy. The clouds are not defined like the next photo. In this photo, you can see all the clouds are very well defined. But in the previous photo, you see the clouds are not defined. It's like hazy, but it's so beautiful. It's like milky. And to get that, you need to use long exposure as well. And you can also try some flowy water. Right, so these are all moving subjects, by the way. Yeah, so this is flowy water. So you can see the ferociousness of the water just like flowing from the height. So this is something you can think about shooting. And I think I have one more example of it. Yeah, here, this one. You can see how fast the water is dropping. You can show the speed of water. Or if you want to show the beauty of water, you can use the silky smooth version of the same image, but this one shows the ferociousness of the water. All right, so the next I want to show is the star one. Okay, so here in this photo, you can see the stars as dots from far away. But if you zoom in a bit, you can see all the star trails. So that you need to find a sweet spot between the actual, the star trail and the dot. while at the field. You need to just play around. But I give you the random, not the random, I give you values that you can start with, right? So light trails. If you start to use 1/8 of a second, you will start to see light trails. Like if you want to capture traffic, you can either go like all in like 30 seconds, or if you want to hand hold the camera and shoot some light trails, you can start with 1/8 of a second. Stationary subjects. Okay, you can use the practical rule, and for posing subjects, you can use the general rule because they are moving a bit, and casual moving for people. This is my rule. Okay, so whatever.
One
Yeah.
question. If we
So
use long shutter speed, will we see trail of waves?
trail of waves. Yeah. So how do I put it? Depends on how ferocious the waves are. There are two types of waves here. I will show you this one. This is not slow shutter speed. Okay, so this is like very normal shutter speed. You can see all the waves are frozen, and you can see all the ferociousness of the waves. But if you want to make it silky smooth, you can do it to some extent. But what you will see is all the ripples, which is actually quite distracting in my opinion. You need to find the balance between very long shutter speed and very slow shutter speed. So, I mean, very fast shutter speed. This is not pleasing to my eye. Yes, true. But you can make it like 1/4 of a second or one half a second shutter speed to make it just right there. Okay, you can show the grandiose, the ferociousness of the waters, but also not too distracting. If the ripples are like too smooth, it will be distracting, which is not pleasing at all.
What about at the beach?
Yeah, beach. Let me go to the beach. Yeah, beach is also the same. This, for example, this is actually the one with very slow shutter speed. You can see all the gradient of shadows and light. This is not pleasing in my opinion. This is very distracting. So you need to avoid these kind of photos. For beach, let's say for beach, you see for beach, you can make it very smooth if you use long exposure. It will be very silky. But the waves and this region, it will be kind of distracting. You still need to find a sweet spot. This is actually a long exposure shot. Let me try to pick it up. This one is actually 1 second or 2 seconds, not too much. So this is kind of still pleasing in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so thank you, Alissa, for helping me out reading the chats. All right, so this is again, this is not slow shutter speed. So you can see all the waves. It is still distracting. I'm still learning, by the way. So you need to find the right shutter speed for these kind of waves and waters. It's kind of hard, you know. This is a silky smooth water flow, very mystical, magical. I like it. Here you don't want to show the ferociousness of the water because it's not like a high fall. Here, this one works for this photo. So it depends on where you are and what kind of mood you're going to set for the image. You can choose the right shutter speed. Right. Casual moving people. Right. So that's my general rule. 1/60th of a second and higher. That will be for casually moving of people if you want to freeze them. But if you want to make a shadow of them, if you want to show them motion blur, 1/60th of a second, regardless of the lens. Okay. But I mean, for the standard focal length, from 24 to 70, this will work. Beyond 70, you need to make sure that you go 1 divided by the focal length of a second. For fast moving people, if you want to freeze them, like events, for example, then 320th of a second. I will give you an example. So let me pick this one. I think this is, yeah, 320th of a second. It's still blur, but the reason is different. I'll explain in a bit. Okay, so you need higher than this for reasonably fast moving people in any events. And Events, depending on how people are moving, you have to choose higher shutter speeds. Sports, definitely very high shutter speeds. And flying objects, at least 1/2000th of a second. I will explain what is the result, what is the effect of them, like when you do them, right? So for example, I'll go back to one of these photos. This is a flying object, right? Guess what is the shutter speed of this one? I think I shot this at 1/4000th or 8000th of a second. And still, I can only see partial elements in focus because it is like flying. It's a very difficult photo to take. No butterfly will come and pose in front of you, like winging, like flying in front of you, like opening its wings. But what we can see here is the focused parts are very sharp because the shutter speed was very high, and even the antennae are very sharp. And I was able to do it because the light that falls on this butterfly is enormous. It's a bright daylight, and I got all the sunlight, which allowed me to go to that high shutter speeds. Okay, and look at this one. This is a very shadow region of a tree. These owls, they love to hide in some close spots in between the nodes of the branches, and you cannot use that high of a shutter speed here, otherwise the images will be very noisy. So it's okay if you shoot some birds when they are perching, like enjoying the shade, right? But it's still reasonably sharp. And this one is in a broad daylight. You can see the image is very sharp as well. Likewise, right? So depending on the situation, you need to decide what shutter speed to use. And what you need, the most essential part is the light falling on the subject, which you may not have. And I will explain how you can tackle them in the next few sections. Okay, so far any doubts? Okay. Now moving on to the camera movement. You can use the camera movement to an advantage. Usually, it's recommended you move your camera very less. Okay, any camera movement will incur shake in the image, but sometimes you need to move your camera to follow the fast-moving subjects and capture them, and which creates this beautiful, beautiful effect of showing how the background is very stationary compared to the moving subjects. Like for example, events like sports, like for example, this one, F1 car race. This is from a different source. I'm just using it for the time being. When I capture something like this, I will replace it. Yeah, this is against the copyright thing. Yeah, but yeah, I'm crediting them. It's not my picture by any means. So yeah, just for educational purpose, I'm using fair use. I hope so. But anyway, so this is something that you can try. Even with birds or even with animals, you can do this. Sometimes if you see a fast cheetah just chasing a deer, and when both of them are in the frame, you tend to see all the background to be like lines, right? That's because of the camera movement just chasing those animals. It's an amazing effect. You can use the camera movement for your advantage, but it requires tons of practice, okay? Stabilization. We usually think the stabilization in any lens is kind of good, right? Like mostly it's good. In reality, it's actually good, very good. But what happens is sometimes stabilization can be counterintuitive, and that's when I want to fire up my Lightroom and show you the 30,000 plus images that I have shot and how many I have rejected because of stabilization that affected me to get non-sharp images. But before that, let me explain a few things. There are a few types of stabilization. Okay, so the first one is actually the sensor stabilization. And before I do that, I need to make sure it's closed. So you see, when I shake the camera, the sensor actually shakes because it is suspended on some kind of a stabilization system. So that's the sensor stabilization system, which is a new thing for mirrorless cameras. It used to be there for phones. It used to be there for other video cameras, but for commercial, very consumer-oriented cameras, this is the era that is introducing a lot of image stabilization. Era as in like for the past decade. Before that, we used to have something called the optical image stabilization that's there in the lens. Okay? And this is a very monstrosity of a lens, which very limited people around the world have. Why? Because this is a very professional, sports-oriented, event-oriented, portrait-oriented lens. So there are very niche use cases for this because of its limited range. But wherever it is used, the results are mind-blowing because of the aperture and the image quality that this lens produces. And you can see here, just by looking at the amount of buttons, you can say that it is professional oriented. And you can see there are a few things here. OSS, the optical image stabilization. Sony calls it as optical image stabilization. Canon calls it differently. Nikon calls it differently. And Tamron, Sigma, they call it differently. So Nikon calls it vibration reduction. Tamron calls it vibration control. Nikon, other systems call it differently. But by the end of the day, I think Canon calls it OIS, optical image stabilization. So this is what it is. There is some stabilization system in the lens that works in tandem with the camera's sensor stabilization or the camera that doesn't have the sensor stabilization. It works in tandem with the sensor. So you can enable them or disable them on the lens or on the camera. You have different modes. Okay, so here you can choose if you're gonna pan, you need to select a particular mode. If you're going to tilt or being erratic, you have to select a different mode. Or if you are using as a tripod, just holding the camera, just pointing to a subject, you can use a different mode. So these are the kind of modes that are available. Very sophisticated use case of this image stabilization. It can be as good as this, and it can be as good as nothing. So these are the kind of stabilization that we have. And depending on the situation, you'll be using it very differently, right? So I already explained 3 scenarios. And for wildlife, let's say, for example, you use some sophisticated lens like that, you have a better chance of disabling the image stabilization when you're using high shutter speeds rather than enabling them. Okay, it can become very counterintuitive if you're using very high shutter speed. So, yeah, before we move on, let's address the chat.
In case when trying to follow subjects like race cars, if I use any stabilizer, will shutter speed need tweaks? Any suggestions for scenarios, say, depending on subject speed? Also, are there any accessories that can help with high-speed object tracking?
High-speed object tracking. So there are a few accessories. Of course, accessories are a different world. And whenever it comes to high-speed object tracking, it requires practice. No matter how many accessories you have, you really need to use your hands and the mounting. Like I used to use, I don't have it anymore, but I used to have something like a very specialized gimbal for wildlife and sports tracking, which I stopped using it altogether because most of the time I don't use it at all. I handhold it or I just use a ball head. But for sports photographers, they use gimbals, the specialized gimbals, to not track, but just mount and allow them the freedom of movement to turn around whenever and wherever they need. So, and when it comes to shutter speed, it all depends on how fast the subject is, right? So one thing to consider is you need to match the speed of the movement of the subject with the panning motion along with the shutter speed. So that's why we have cameras. Okay, for example, this one A6700 can go up to shutter speeds of 1/4000th of a second mechanically and 1/8000th of a second electronically. We will come to that electronic shutter later, very late in this topic, but let's assume that it can go up to 1/8000th of a second. You will not be using that 1/8 of a second to shoot every single sports. You really need to match at the moment how fast the subject is. Depending on that, you will decide upon your panning motion to match the subject. Okay, by the end of the day, you're trying to freeze the frame. with some motion blur on the background. If you have very fast shutter speeds, you don't get this motion. Let me change it back. So this motion is there because it is of a slow shutter speed. It's not like too fast. It may be 1/500th of a second or 1/400th of a second. So it really requires a lot of practice to get this kind of background blur. But if you don't care about this background blur, the motion blur, you can always freeze the subject with higher shutter speeds. There is no problem with it. Okay, let me give you an example. So I have a lot of these photos. Okay, so these birds are pretty erratic in my opinion. Okay, this one in particular. Okay, this was flying just above my head. This was shot using, I think, A6700. No, this is A7C2. Okay, this is a very full frame sensor. So you can see how I have cropped, right? So it's all like turned, twisted, and cropped. And even with the very big sensor camera, when I shot with 1/2000th of a second, you can still see a very tiny bit of motion blur, and the entire image is actually bad. Okay, it's a very bad image. But if you're going for silhouettes, for example, this one, it's a very cloudy, moody day, and I don't know how well I can show you guys this one in particular. Yeah, it's all bad. Okay, this is what happens sometimes when you actually go beyond 1/2000th of a second with the image stabilization enabled. So this is the kind of image you might get. This is because of bad, how to say, it's because of bad autofocusing as well. And you can see how blurry the image looks. It's not sharp at all. But there are a few that I can show you that it's very sharp. Okay, even not this one. So I want to chalk these images out because they don't have enough reach. Like my camera did not have enough reach, and that's why these were not good enough images. This one is sharp. Okay, this one is sharp because I followed the motion of the bird, and even though the image stabilization was on, it was okay because you need to follow and match the movement of the bird, especially flying objects or moving objects. You need to really match your panning motion with the bird. If you're just keeping the camera stationary, which is still okay, but if you are panning in a very different way, erratic way, to find the subject on the sky, because the field of view is so narrow, super narrow, you need to find it from the viewfinder. And if you do very erratic actions, then you will end up getting the other kind of images, this kind of images, which is very bad in my opinion. But this is okay. This is kind of salvageable. So yeah, here for these kind of images, I don't care about the background blur at all. This is a kite. I am not sure how it looks like. Okay, this is actually okay, reasonably sharp in my opinion. By the way, the lens that I used is 200 to 600 millimeter lens, and definitely the reach is not okay. Let me pick up something else. This, for example, is a shot of moon shot with A7C2 again. You can see that this is sharp, but the aperture is f8. Probably I should have gone higher, but yeah. This moon also moves pretty fast. Like, let me show you. I was surprised how fast the moon moved. You can see the moon is still going up. I had to readjust every single time. Yeah, it moves pretty fast. So you can see the moon to be stationary with your naked eyes, but when you start shooting them, it's pretty fast. Anyway, if that is cleared, I can move on to the next topic. Yeah, one more thing. You guys can actually go to this page and go to these sections, and you can play around with these sliders on these topics. So the link is tech.alissaj.com/art of photography, art-of-photography. So from there you can choose this drop down and go to sharp photos for today's topic.
Okay, so yeah, understood to a basic level, it seems like a rich topic. Very nice to see both good and poor examples. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, you really need to have a lot of practice. And yeah, no matter how many accessories you have, it's the photographer who takes good images. Anyway, going back to stabilization, this is hit or miss, by the way. Sometimes it actually helps to turn off the stabilization and just follow the standard rule. 1 divided by twice the focal length of a second. That one. All right. Now is the topic where we discuss light and ISO. So this is a pretty clear-cut example of if you're going to use high ISOs, the image will not be sharp. And I can show you pretty clearly this one, for example. You can see the hair looks okay, especially from far away. It looks okay, but even if you zoom quite a bit, you can see that hair is all smudged. And the reason is the ISO is 1/1600. You might think that, okay, it's not that much of a high ISO, but you see, this is what you get, especially in the events in mixed lighting conditions. And I can show you a different example where ISO actually ruined the image. So, oops, I don't have it here. But anyway, here, if you see Alissa's photo, if you were to zoom in, you can see everything is super smudged. Yeah, you can download these images, by the way. You can just right click and save this image, and you can check it out how bad the ISO is. I have given you the EXIF data on the right side. ISO 6000 for Alissa and the frog image, and you can see this is actually a presenter's image with ISO 125th of ISO 125. What happens here is that the lower the ISO, the lesser will be the noise reduction used by the camera. These are JPEG images right out of the camera. If you were to turn off the noise reduction from the camera and then you take the raw images and you process in the post, then you have a better chance of actually getting sharper images, because the post-production noise reductions, they are on a different level. They use different algorithms than what can be done with the cameras. So let me show you an example. I like to show with examples. By the way, here you can see this is a photo without noise reduction enabled. All right, so you can see this is at ISO 1250, that is 1250 ISO, and you can see there's still a lot of noise. This is A7C2 image. Even a camera, a full frame camera, can produce so much noise at lower ISOs, okay, especially during sunrise and sunset time. All right, so to bring out these colors, I had to bump up the shadows quite a bit, and that's exactly what is introducing the noise. If you look at these like this is the actual shot image, you won't find that much noise. But if you start to process these images, you'll start to see a lot of noise. All right. And when you clean up the noise, look at how well it cleans up just by one click of the button, denoise from Lightroom. Okay, you tend to see all the noises gone away. So you can see this is full of noise. I can do a side-by-side comparison for you guys. So let me do it left and right. This is noisy image, and this is a noiseless image. You can see the difference. I hope you can see the difference. But anyway, yeah, this is how noisy it is. All right, and I can give you one more example. This one, drone image. So this one, very noisy indeed. You can see the color noise, you can see the luma noise. Okay, there are two types of noises. One is luma noise and the other one is chroma noise. Chroma noise is the color noise. Luma noise is the light noise. Okay, so the amount of noise you get from exposure is called the luma noise, and the amount of noise that you get from the colors. You see all the garbage values for the pixels that you get here, all the white colors, they are called chroma noise, right on the color. And you can see that it's pretty much cleaned up here, how well the noise reduction cleans up. So that's why most people who are having really good cameras, they don't worry about these noises. They just go for high ISO, faster shutter speeds, and get the image. Getting the image is more important than worrying about the noise in the field. Noise comes later, but having low ISOs will actually help you to control the noise that you get. But focusing and getting the image is more important again. So this is at ISO 3200. At ISO 3200, you might not think that A7C II will not produce this much noise, but apparently any camera will produce this much noise. Okay, on the paper, on the very far away frame, you don't see that amount of noise, right? But when I zoom in, it's very, very, very evident. Okay, this is not even a moving subject. And if I were to take a moving subject, this is a moving subject. Okay, so let me show you the process as well. This is a moving subject. I'm going to increase the shadows, reduce the highlights, and increase the dehaze just for this sake. Okay. Always I make sure the histogram is on the right side so that I get a reasonable amount of exposure. And I think I'm okay with this one, right? So here it's sharp. Here is where my camera focused. And here it's sharp still. And the lens over here, the cameras over here are hidden, which is fine in my opinion. It's flying. You can see the motion of the blades. And this is at the shutter speed of 1/640th of a second. You can see all the motion, the curved motion of the blades. You can see here it's like a trident, which is not how it's supposed to be, but the curves are introduced because of slow shutter speed. Slow shutter speed. Yeah. Anyway, here we can see what we can do with the noise reduction. You can see it's pretty much full of noise. And I'm going to hit the denoise button from the Lightroom. It's going to remove all the noise. Basically, it's going to take the nearby pixels and it's going to take out all the noise. Just smoothen it like AI. Okay, this exactly is the AI noise reduction technology. And you can choose the level of noise reduction that you want. I'm just going for 90 here. And yes, of course, it's going to introduce certain level of artifacts, the garbage values that it cannot understand the pattern. So be careful when you use these kind of noise reduction software. See, it's over smoothened this, which I actually don't like. Over smoothing is very bad. And these are the kind of artifacts you can see. Exactly. This is what I was worried about. So make sure you have your ISOs low. Otherwise, you will end up with bad images, even though you get the image, right? So I can still go here, get a noisy image. I find the right balance, keeping the noise levels at 50 something and enhance it. This is just to show you that, okay, it's even if it's like acceptable noise levels, it should be okay. And it will be very demanding for your computer to process a huge batch of photos. Okay, this is reasonably good in my opinion. This is 50% noise reduced. And even though there is some kind of noise here and there, I find it very pleasing, very natural compared to the other one. This one is like having artifacts and all. Right, so let me just compare these two. This on the left. Okay, this on the right. Yeah. Oh, this before after. Okay, so let me put this here. Yeah, so there's not as much of artifacts on the left image than the right image. So that's what I'm going for. Okay. Any doubts so far? And I hope you understood the ISO and the light actually affects the images, and having more light is actually beneficial, especially when the subject is moving, and lowering the ISO is actually very beneficial in case you want to reduce the noise in the post. And also in camera noise reduction, please turn it off. Do the noise reduction in the post, otherwise you end up with very, very, very bad images like this one. Here basically she's smudged. Just because I used a very, very powerful and sharp lens like 50mm f1.2 lens, at least her hair strands are visible from far away. If you were to download and zoom, it will be very smudged. Alright, any doubts so far? Any chat? No? Nothing? Okay. Alright, final topic today is actually the shutter. Okay, whenever we are in events and when we are in very mixed lighting conditions, what we tend to use is we tend to put the camera in the silent mode, that is the electronic shutter mode, and think that, okay, we should be very inconspicuous, like not make any sound from the camera shutter at all. So let's put it in the silent mode. Let's use the electronic shutter. And more often than never, we end up with images like this. This is a clear photo and a situation of banding. So here you can see a lot of lines, horizontal lines. So why does it appear in the image? It's because of the scanning. These are called scanning lines. This is how the image scans from top to bottom, and while scanning, it has this tiny interval that ends up with this kind of banding situation. And for this event, I used FX30. FX30 is a camera without any mechanical shutter. So especially in the mixed lighting conditions, you will have to deal with this. All right, so better go with mechanical shutter. Mechanical shutter somehow uses the mechanical shutter to open and close the sensor, expose the sensor basically, and it prevents the banding. But the electronic shutter, when it closes the shutter, like turns off the signal, somehow it goes and introduce banding. So that's bad in my opinion. And so especially for events in mixed lighting conditions, always make sure that you avoid banding. And the size of sensor matters. So as we saw earlier in Lightroom, so this was the result with big sensor cameras like A7C II. And if you're going to use a small sensor camera like A6700, okay, so let me pick them up and show you the effect of it. So here I can do that with filters, camera info. So you can see I have shot over 38,000 images using several different camera systems, and from them I'm just going to pick up this, and especially with 200 to 600 millimeters glass, because that's a very demanding glass and especially used for wildlife and other things, sports sometimes. Yeah, for sports they don't usually use it. Anyway, let's see, 600 millimeters. At 600 millimeters, I have shot over 2,000 photos. That's something, right? Let's see. Okay, what happened was like all of my photos got deleted from the hard disk apparently. Okay, here we have one. Here's an example of a black kite flying from the top of the tree to the ground to be with their folks. So their folks are down here. And you can see here, far away it looks okay. But even if you zoom in a bit, okay, you see what happens. You see a lot of noise. The image is okay-ish sharp. But if you were to reduce the noise, okay, this image could not be found for some reason. Okay, so if you were to introduce the noise reduction, it's going to smoothen it out, increase the sharpness, and it's going to look much better. And I think I have this image right here. Okay, where is it? Okay, not here. Anyway, I will find it and I'll post it right on the website, but for now we can see how it looks like. Yeah, that's what I mean. So for example, this one was shot at around the same shutter speed, like 2000th of a second. This one with A6700, the reach really helps, and it actually, for the same ISO, you get better images with crop sensor cameras, especially for wildlife, and you need to consider that as well. I wish I can show you better images, but unfortunately, none of these images are there in the hard disk. What a fail. But yeah, I love photographing all these animals and birds. They're just beautiful and cute. Let's see if we have anything else. So I will leave this time until I pick up the right image to show you, to ask any questions anyone might have. So let me know in the chat. All right. So yeah, we are at the end. So basically having big sensor helps, especially for events and sports, but not for wildlife. For wildlife, having a crop sensor is beneficial with the reach, and for the same ISO, you get really good images. And especially this camera, A6700 camera, is very good in shooting wildlife images. The optical performance of the lens, whatever it is, it's going to assist the capabilities of A6700. All right, my voice is getting drier and drier. Okay. And I think I pretty much covered everything I wanted to talk about getting sharp images. So in a nutshell, keep the shutter speed at optimum level, keep the ISO low, get as much light as possible. If you cannot get light, use something like this, very tiny one, but very effective in shedding some light to get the autofocus right. If you're using a camera that is very poor at autofocus, make sure you try to use manual focus and ask the people to pose. People do want to be taken good pictures of, and they will pose for you. You don't have to hesitate asking them, and take your time to understand and learn what settings works for which situations. And with that said, I think we can conclude this session. This will be the last session for this year. Very happy new year, and signing off for today. All right, yeah, peace.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Yeah, Alissa is saying thank you as well. All right. See you.